Welcome back to the Think Small podcast. My guest today is David Esposito from ONL Therapeutics. We had a really fantastic conversation some time ago, and we scheduled this podcast recording to discuss the background on what it's like to develop a new drug that you're trying to bring to the market from a R&D perspective, and then bringing in investors. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. David, welcome to the podcast.
Alex, thank you very much. Really happy to be here. Look forward to the discussion.
Yeah. So I was re-listening to our pre-call, and like I said on our pre-call, really, the pharmaceutical side of things and the drug development and the FDA approval process is sort of a mystery to me. So why don't you just jump right in and pretend like I know nothing about it, because admittedly, it is still quite a bit of a mystery to me. So just let's dive in. What is ONL Therapeutics all about?
Sure. I'll give a summary of ONL and maybe touch on a little bit of the journey of drug discovery. So ONL Therapeutics is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right outside the University of Michigan. So our technology comes out of the research of the University of Michigan. Our founder, Dr. David Esposito, is a retina specialist. And David, in his research, discovered the relevance of this receptor on retinal cells called the FAS receptor, FAS. And we've developed over the years drugs that target that receptor. So basically block that receptor from being activated, which protects retinal cells across a variety of diseases, things like age-related macular degeneration, open-angle glaucoma, retinal detachment. I can speak a little bit more about that, but we are a classic university-derived spin-out. And I think for your audience, and the question maybe is what you initially said too, there's a lot of great research going on in the U.S., a lot of it principally out of academic institutions and researchers that way. Ultimately, it is a long haul to get through clinical development, ultimately FDA approval. I think you hear a lot more about the blockbuster drugs. What you don't hear about is the amount of really good scientific work going on that for a company like ONL typically can be a 10, 15-year journey before even approaching the FDA.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The amount of time and effort to get to market, and you're right about like designer drugs and things that have kind of come out of it, or those, first 5 to 10 years of a drug gaining popularity and new to the market. How many drugs and or therapeutics that didn't make it because they were tested out, or somebody just ran out of money, or things that were left on the drawing board, floor. If this is not your first rodeo, right? I mean, you have a background in developing these, processes.
Yeah, sure. My background, a little bit over 30 years in life sciences. Started off my career with a large pharma company, Merck, for about 15, 16 years. And then the last half of that 30 years has been more in the early stage, building innovation, both on the therapeutic side and the diagnostic side. And to your point, I think there is a very small percentage of initial discoveries of targets of interest, say on a disease state, that ultimately progress to commercialization. I mean, it's a very small percentage. And the typical journey of that is figuring out what the target perhaps in the body that you want to either activate or block for a variety of reasons, ultimately developing a compound to do that, testing it in animal trials, and then phase 1, 2, and then 3 are ultimately the 3 is the ultimate registrational study for FDA approval. Then the complexities of commercializing, pricing, and reimbursement, all of those add to the mix to determine what's a blockbuster or not. So I've participated on all aspects of that continuum in my career. It's a little bit different on the diagnostic side. You can get to market a little faster, but today in my journey today with ONL, we're on the therapeutic side.
Yeah. So tell me, a little bit more about, the therapeutic work that ONL is doing. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, and I have a friend that I was thinking about. They, I think they turned 45 or something like that. And then we're sitting there on their couch watching TV, and then realized that there was a spot in their vision that just went blank. And they went to the doctor and they said, yeah, it just happens. You have age-related, spot blindness. And he's like, what? That's a thing? But you're telling me that that doesn't have to be a thing, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal, right?
Sure. I think where ONL Therapeutics is focused is on back of the eye diseases. So your retina's in the back of the eye. Sometimes a lot of people think the only things you need are glasses in front of the eye, contacts, and a lens replacement. But we work in the back of the eye, ultimately where cells of the retina transduce light and then send signals back to your brain to ultimately you see with your brain. And so we're focused on protecting those specific cells across conditions that your friend may or may not with the ultimate diagnosis had engaged in. But ultimately, these are predominantly diseases of the aging. So a condition we're working on is dry age-related macular degeneration. So these are lesions on the back of the eye that do present as spots sometime in your vision. And Alex, the interesting thing, the brain is wonderful, eyes are wonderful, begins to compensate for those spots. So very early on in that disease state, you may not even realize it because your brain's just seeing perhaps with your left eye, your right eye's got the spots. And then eventually it does progress to a point where it really clouds your vision and then dramatically can cause a slow path to blindness. So what we are working on is a drug that slows the progression of that lesion once it's identified, slows the progression. So the hope would be slows your progression to ultimate blindness. We're not in the business of regenerating dead retinal cells. And unlike skin cells that regenerate, retinal cells don't. So when you lose a retinal cell, you begin to get that patchy vision, so to speak, over time. That's where we're aiming to protect those cells and slow that pathway.
That's fascinating. Really incredible. I mean, it really makes me optimistic as a young person that, that you guys exist for the future of of vision or my vision, right? Hoping that process goes well for you as you move down the way towards FDA approval. Where are you at in that process?
Sure. Great question. So we are about midway through that range. We are in phase 2 clinical trials. So our drug ONL 1204 is what's called technically a small peptide. It's delivered via intravitreal injection. So it's an injection in the eye. Many in the audience may not realize that, or everybody somewhat freaks out thinking about getting needles in the eye, but it is a common method of delivery for things of diseases of age-related macular degeneration. These are technically retina specialists who are doing those injections. But so our drug is injected into the eye. We've proceeded across phase 1 studies, which are primarily driven to ensure safety of the product. We've passed through those, and then ultimately now we're launching a large phase 2 study, about 325 patients in dry age-related macular degeneration. It's a global study. We do hope to have results in about 2 years from now on a primary endpoint to see if we're slowing that lesion. The other aspect of it, we're focused on large chronic diseases. So in order to show an impact on large chronic diseases, usually slow moving, you got to study them for a while. These are not acute ones where you could find a result relatively quickly. So that's the other challenging aspect of this journey. These are long studies, very capital intense, and you hope you get a good result towards the tail end.
That's incredible. The timeline to me always that just blows my mind that you could, be in 2 years. Is there any touch points or inclination that a test is going well, or do you not know until it's concluded?
Sure. So there are conditions where you typically mask the company, researchers, and patients so you can get as best you can an objective result. Especially in our world, people think they got a drug, didn't think they got a drug. They may act differently in the environment. So ultimately, we mask these studies all around so that there is not that perceived bias. And unless there is a dramatic safety signal, you are really riding it out until that end point where it's an image that takes of the eye to see that lesion is slowing compared to untreated or placebo, or in our case, sham injected eyes. So it is a long journey with that. Unlike Alex now some study designs can get a peek in it. Ours, the way we designed it is primary endpoints at 12 months. So we got to see that go through that way. There are, in our phase 1 studies, you get a chance to look, because it's early data, early studies, patient by patient on those things. Now we're in the phase 2 trials. You're really looking at long-term safety and efficacy. Your head's down until the data's unveiled.
That's incredible. All right. So like my question then goes to, because you're testing for something specific at this point, right? You're looking to make sure that you can track and monitor degeneration in the eye, in the back of the eye, right? Is there data, tied to other applications that you're also tracking, or metrics that you're trying to see if there's secondary or tertiary type applications for this, right? Because, from an investment standpoint, if you say, all right, we're raised, $100 million or whatever to run this, large national phase 2 trial, and it comes back after 2 years unsuccessful for what you're tracking. Right. Is there a way to say, hey, we weren't successful at this, but there was a byproduct that we did notice that, I don't know, we were able to treat something else that I don't know if I'm wording that correctly. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, very important point. So we, a couple things with that. Many times when you are studying these trials to ultimately, if this is successful, move into registrational trials, you really need to be very specific on the endpoint you're looking at and drive the statistics of the study. How big should it be? How many patients? All of that kind of stuff. So there is a need to really make a very definitive choice at this point on what you want to look at. However, there are a number of exploratory endpoints in these studies. To your point, if perhaps we missed on that core primary endpoint, boy, could we see some other change at the cellular level that may give us insight for something else. And also, Alex, we also stratified patients in those studies. So, boy, even though across the whole population, did it maybe not work exactly as we wanted, but was it more effective in younger population or a certain stage of that disease? So you're exactly right. Ultimately, you hope you hit the grand slam and that primary endpoint is what you have and you go forward. But you do try to structure additional insights along the way that, to your point, could potentially pivot if your primary doesn't come out. But that is also the nature of drug discovery. Sometimes you get a binary outcome and you got to live with it.
So it's just like a way of sort of like hedging your bets, right? I mean, making sure that you're, looking at it from 100 different angles, right? Because if you put it under a microscope and you're testing for X and X is not right or whatever, then you might miss, 4 or 5 different other applications for it.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the classic part of where we are, so we block this pathway that when there's a stress or disease in the eye, it triggers the death of that retinal cell. It's called the fast pathway. So we can block that with our current compound in the trial, but you have backup compounds that could do the same thing. So very important in drug discovery. Once you validate that pathway is something you want to block, then you think about maybe other means of blocking it that way. And in addition, we're looking at this study with one particular indication, but there are other indications that by protecting those retinal cells, things like glaucoma, retinal detachment that we study as well, could potentially create other opportunities for us. But it also, back to the point you made earlier, these are not inexpensive programs. So you're raising a lot of capital. At the end of the day, you don't have enough time or money to try everything. You got to make a few choices.
It must be quite the decision-making process, right? And the rooms must be filled with some brilliant minds. I have to imagine that, I would be well out of my depth. And even just as a fly on the wall, I'd be like, wow, some pretty brilliant minds in those rooms, huh?
Well, I think, Alex, what's interesting, there's a lot of strong point of views around the table in these things. You have some high science, what's maybe the highest probability scientifically. You have some business folks that say, well, that's the largest market, but it's flooded with competitors. Maybe we try this indication where it's not as competitive and we'd want to go here. And then you have the practical side of, well, how much does it ultimately cost to get to those markets? And what do we think could be the potential upside? So there are a lot of discussions originating around the science and what's the probability of doing that. But then all these other practical implications come into light. What's the size of that market versus this? In addition, especially for us, which is a venture capital funded company, what's the investor interest in that indication versus this one? And many times, if the science can drive you down a few of those indications, a lot of times it's who's interested in really leading a financing round against a particular indication. And that's where you lay down the tracks to make it go. But I will tell you, it's probably the polite way of describing you have some intense debate in those decisions for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about, fundraising in our previous call, and I guess the end game, right? About pre-round 3 or third round trials, right? So the ultimate goal, I suppose, after you've closed your second trial, is to then take those results and then market to a much larger developer to then have them kind of structure the third round, right? Is that how it works?
That's a great point. I would say we at ONL, we need to keep our options open, because many times with a successful phase 2, we need to think about what is that phase 3 strategy. If you look across the marketplace, typically large pharmaceutical companies like to see phase 2 proof of concept data and then potentially structure a deal to really outline the phase 3 registrational plan, which then ultimately drives the approvals from the regulatory authorities, then what you can market in the marketplace. So it's not uncommon for a company like ours to deliver great phase 2 data, and then some of the bigger players come in and want to structure some deal to carry it forward. However, in running the company, we really have to keep our options open, because many times our existing investors with great data, we're a privately held company, the public markets to IPO the company, raise more capital, and do our phase 2 trials on our own could potentially be an option. So we keep our options open that way. Ultimately, Alex, with good data, if we're grateful enough to generate good data, you have a lot of options on the table, and then it gets to a lot of variables to think about which one to take.
It's really interesting stuff, David. I appreciate your insight. Where do I want this to go? They do a great job editing these, so we'll just kind of chug along. So we talked a little bit about like the size of the organization, right? Like your company is around 15 employees.
Right.
And it's nice to be that lean, because you can kind of go fast and long, right? Like you're working as a small organization that's kind of fairly mean and lean, right?
Yeah. No, certainly. I think at our stage of the game, you need committed, energized employees to actually move this thing forward. It's not easy work. So we definitely want to make sure we've got top talent pushing hard. And we have about 15 on the team. We do work a lot with contractors. So in terms of running 100 plus clinical sites around the world, we partner with what's called clinical research organizations, or CROs, to help really actually get on site and deliver the trial in those ways. And we handle a variety of roles, either by consultants, 1099 folks versus full-time. It's a little bit of the trade-off we make at this stage to make sure we have full-time employees to help drive it, but look for partners as well. It's, you see sometimes, Alex, in the journey of drug discovery, people raise a lot of money and scale up a huge team. And then if you hit a blip on the development, it gets pretty painful on building up those big teams. So we try to stay as lean as we can to be able to navigate those options. But it's always a balance with bringing more people on the team for sure.
Something that just kind of popped into my head was around academia. Like, is that like a large part of a resource that you end up using or utilizing, like interns or professor type advisory roles where they'll like flush out a problem during a semester or something?
Yeah, we do. It's really interesting you say that. So University of Michigan has a great business school, and they got great scientific research as well. So we very often tap into both the scientific understanding from many of the researchers there. Dr. David Esposito, our founder, obviously brings a wealth of knowledge to the table, but reaching into a variety of spots in the university to do that, we certainly have. And then on the business side, I could recall in the early days of ONL, we did have an MBA class from the Ross Business School to be able to support how we think about this market segment that we were just talking about. What's the right indications to go for? And so it really is a huge privilege for us to tap into benefits of the University of Michigan to help supplement our learnings. And it's a little bit of a two-way street. A lot of times the university wants to peek inside too and see how things are going. And certainly students and MBA students can get good exposure while they're helping us out. So we find it to be a good classic win-win opportunity for everybody.
Sure. It's all about that symbiotic relationship, right? Like it looks great on a resume for these emerging students trying to get to the workplace, but then also on your end, it's like we can take advantage of those like strong minds, right?
I would say that for certainly. And I would just say also to the appreciation that ultimately innovation moves these fields forward, and ultimately innovation in our current models is really driven by a lot of academic research, and that gets to NIH funding and all the things that you see in the papers today. It's ultimately important how a lot of this groundbreaking research starts. And then at the end of the day, it's folks like you and I in an early angel seed round putting $5,000, $10,000 in because we know Jimmy, he's a smart guy. We believe in him. Let's write him a check and help. And then ultimately you get more institutional professional money like venture capitals. But that's the exciting part of being on this forward edge of innovation. You brilliant researcher that has to, come together with some business minds to put a few dollars in a pot and move it forward. And that to me is what's always been purposeful on ending some of these diseases that are attacking humans, but also just the energy around seeing that discovery is a really cool place to be.
Yeah, it's like two industries meet and just kind of run with it, and it's almost like a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah, the only it is. I think the only, I'd say, reality check for everybody is you usually read about a few of these things that go great. You don't hear about probably the 90+% of people who are doing great purposeful work, driving science forward, but yet they don't come to the market with a product because at various points in the journey, something inevitably, comes off the rails. That's the high risk life I think we've all chosen who are in this innovation game.
Yeah, but it's it seems very interesting to go from the drawing board through to development, and then exciting to be in a position where you're at because you've been down that road. You're all the way now into a second trial, which is like probably most of I would think if 1% of the drugs that are written up on a paper get to the market, you've probably beaten 70% of them to this point, right? I mean, how much opportunity has already fallen off and not gotten to this point now, right?
Very good point. No, we've made really steady progress, which is really terrific. And we hope for things to come down the road. But you're certainly right. No, we feel really good about where we are. And then this trial will help prove it further.
So I always like to end these on a really high note, on an optimistic front. So I'm curious to know what you're most excited about potentially in the next 6 to 12 months. So I know that's shorter than your 2-year big results, right? But is there anything that you're like really, really just pumped for in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, we think the space we're working in now, this dry age-related macular degeneration, is a condition where, Alex, there had never been an approved therapy for patients with this disease. And we're talking millions of patients worldwide. 2 years ago, 2 companies got approval for it. And what you see now over the next 6 to 12 months, companies like ONL, we're active in a trial that we're just talking about. There are a handful of others making very good progress in phase 3 and phase 2. And so what really excites me is that for the benefit of patients who have been told over the years by a doctor, there's nothing more than I can do for you for this condition, they very well will have a number of options coming forward. And that's why we're all in this game. We hope ONL succeeds, but if not, if we move the ball forward enough that others can pick it up and run with it, that would be great because there are a tremendous amount of patients that need, and vision is a precious thing. We hope we can make a real difference out there for people.
Well, I definitely wish you the best on that, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much again for being a guest today. It's been enlightening. I really enjoy our conversations. You get my brain working in a different way because I have to think on that medical side, but that's awesome. Thank you so much again.
Alex, thanks for having me. Really had a great time.